Hi, I am Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, December 12th, 2025. Lots of cool stuff coming up in this episode. I've got so many rantables. I hope that I can just kind of, keep an even keel, because there's lots of really unpleasant things that I want to talk about, things that make me feel unpleasant that I want to talk about. But first, I also want to give you the heads up that we have a little bit of a follow-up on the Matthews proxy fight, as well as a feature on the American River College in California, which has a new mortuary school opening. Well, has opened, but ready for its first students in January. But before we get to the stories and all of that, let's listen to this message from our friends and sponsors at Homesteaders.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteaders' financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company owned by our policy owners, we remain laser focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in investing in tools and services that benefit funeral providers.
I'm not going to spend too much time in Texas this week, not because there's not enough to say, but because there's so much to say, and it's starting to get a little unwieldy, so I want to try to get it in order and put out something that makes a little bit of sense, or at least as much sense as can be made out of everything that's going on down there. The only reason that I even bring it up is I did want to mention that Unique Green, who we had spoken about having been arrested and then released from charges last week, has been accused of stealing $2 million and of forgery and of fraudulent estate claims in the most recent search warrant. So the police have continued to dig into this case, and as someone who's been kind of following this from before it broke, my expectation is they're not going to find less the longer they look. This is something that's going to kind of, I think, infect a whole region. And mostly I wanted to talk about it because I want to kind of juxtapose what's going on in Houston with what's going on in New York, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And so in Houston, you have this entire community that's, trying to get the Texas Funeral Service Commission and the police to kind of take a look at some of what they believe are shady funeral directors. There are several that are operating in the area without much luck. And I think it says a little bit about the neighborhood, because in a very wealthy neighborhood in New York, I'll call them people who live near the Amagone crematory thought that they saw smoke coming out of the chimney there and got the governor involved. And as it turned out, it was just a test to see what the equipment was doing and to make sure that if it were turned on, it was compliable. But they called the governor. And you've got to learn, you've got to love, they call the governor, they call the representative, they have all sorts of statements, and there's links to all of this in the show notes. They have all sorts of statements about how they're definitely not going to let these people reopen their awful polluting crematory and funeral home in their neighborhood. And it's interesting. It's an interesting, like I said, juxtaposition, and there's links to both of those stories in the show notes, but I've got something on New York coming up next as well. So this other story out of New York is going to be compared to a story out of the Midwest later on. So pay attention because there'll be a test. So there has been a report, an audit actually by the New York State Comptroller's Office that covers April 2019 through November 2023. And it has revealed, according to the report, significant and widespread deficiencies in the state and New York City health agencies' oversight of the funeral industry. A couple of things. The most of these violations were in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And so there is a COVID effect that I think may not be taken properly into consideration when worrying about whether or not funeral homes are doing a great job. But according to the audit, there were thousands of cases where bodies were buried or cremated before the required documentation was filed, and that led to the use of potentially invalid burial permits and raised the risk that the final arrangement did not match the deceased or family's wishes. There were potential misidentified corpses because of inconsistent labeling practices and what they call shoddy efforts by some directors who rely on medical staff or personal judgment rather than the required tests to confirm death. So they were taking the doctor's word for it that the patients were dead. And, we've actually seen a couple of those in the news nationally, in different jurisdictions. So that's something, obviously that is a potential problem. And I don't want to poo-poo any of this because these are all serious allegations and represent potential serious problems. But this is where the kind of screw turns a little bit, worm turns, I guess, a little bit. Budget cuts led the state to replace regular in-person inspections with a one-time photo submission for embalming rooms, which meant that regulators have little assurance of sanitary conditions. So at the bottom of it, the state cut all of the inspections, and now the inspections, since they're not getting done, aren't being very well complied with. That sounds very Texas-y to me. But I don't know if it's necessarily a budget thing. But we are running up against the bottom of what we are willing to do when it comes to handling the deceased publicly. And I don't want to say it's a crisis yet, but I think it may be a crisis soon. And I want to tell you another story that I think helps to back that up. In Pennsylvania, the Blair County Commissioners voted unanimously to accept the withdrawal of the storage and transportation contract held by Clear Creek, which is a biohazard removal company, and that forced the county to temporarily rely on the second place bidder, Forced Livery Service. And this was over strong objections from the coroner, Ray Benton. Clear Creek said it wasn't enough money. It was $365 per decedent to pick them up and store them until the coroner could look at them and was done with them. And they were that was a higher bid than Forced Delivery Service had provided. But Forced Delivery Service, according to Mr. Benton, is not a great company. He described the forced storage area, which is just a cooler located in a 3-car carport, as deplorable and surrounded by junk. And he said he's already received complaints from the last time they had the contract about bodies being stored outside legal temperature range. And he also worried about the lack of security cameras that could jeopardize the chain of custodies for bodies considered evidence in criminal investigations. This is not unusual, although I don't see it very often. Oftentimes in small towns, one or several of the funeral homes will either pitch in or have the contract to pick up and hold these bodies. But in Blair County, they have considered ordering refrigerators and for the coroner's office, I guess, finally. But they're not in yet. So they're going to cross their fingers and put the deceased that go to the coroner in this, what the coroner himself says is, suboptimal storage facility. And I think it's time to admit that there is a cost associated with handling the dead that towns and counties and communities need to recognize. And this is the number of stories I've done about towns who won't pay what the funeral directors or the storage facilities or any of the people who do the work think is a fair amount is getting to the point where this guy just said, you know what? No, for $365 isn't enough. Give the other guy, I think the other guy had bid like $290. If you want to give this guy $290 and, leave bodies in a freezer, in a carport, that is the kind of town or county that you want to be. But Clear Creek, they couldn't do a good enough job for $365, and they didn't want that responsibility. So that's where we stand there. And hopefully, they'll get their refrigerators before too long. The county now ponied up to expedite their refrigerator order. So you never know. It may not end in tears, but if it does end in tears, it's everybody's fault. I think it's important to recognize that if you're not going to pay what it costs, then you're going to get suboptimal service, I guess, and work done. But anyway, link to that in the show notes. So there's a certain bias that I think I have that comes from assuming that everyone reads, all the magazines all the time. And when I saw this story from Rest Haven Memorial Park in Tampa, my first thought was, but we just covered that in American Cemetery and Cremation, and we cover it all the time. I think that these folks may have missed the story. Families visiting Rest Haven Memorial Park in Tampa were shocked and angered in early December to find dozens of personalized grave covers, many featuring photos and tributes, had been removed from headstones and piled up like, quote, trash, unquote. The cemetery's owner, identified here as Faithful Heritage Holdings Incorporated, confirmed the action but refused further comment on the situation. A cemetery manager told reporters that the removal was done to enforce a long-standing but previously ignored policy prohibiting man-made grave coverings. So this is a story that, Tom has covered well. Tom Nondorf, the editor of American Cemetery and Cremation, has covered very well and extensively. And it's just a shame to see this is something that is easily fixed. If you have a rule that you've never enforced, you oughtn't just start enforcing it. Because what's going to happen now, if the past is any predictor, is families are going to start coming forward more and more. And I left this special thing, and I can't believe they did this. And this is going to be stories of cemeteries doing bad things or making families feel bad. Always have legs. They always have legs. And the thing that is unfortunate is that if you have a sign that is being ignored, then take the sign down. Don't just start randomly enforcing it. There could have been a call to families. There could have been a lot of things that were done. And these are things that, again, Tom has gone over, and Tom's experts that he's spoken with have gone over time and again in American Cemetery and Cremation. And as long as I'm talking about that publication, I should say that if you like YouTube or have YouTube, and I think you have YouTube because it's everywhere, we have a show that Tom does called American Cemetery Live. And that is, I think, one of those recent shows was about this very topic. It's one that's important because it's an easy fix and it's a tragic mistake waiting to happen. And just there's of course, cemetery needs to be maintained, and of course the cemetery needs to be kept clean, but you have to work, you would do well to work with their families, because if you're just going to surprise them by throwing out all their toys, as Tom would say if he was the one hosting this show, the news is just going to have a shot of all these, teddy bears and all these cutesy little things. This one has, a shot of all of the personal effects of this person, of one of the people there. And it's a bad look for no good reason. So if you don't subscribe to American Cemetery and Cremation, you should, because otherwise you might miss out on important things like there's a right way, or there's a smart way and a less smart way to deal with grave goods and to deal with keeping order in the cemetery. And consistency has to be a part of it, and when you're going to do these great big cleanups, you have to do more than say, hey, we told you that you weren't supposed to have them here, and even though we haven't cleaned up in the recent past, we're going to clean up now, and we're going to throw all your things out. And horrible look, and completely avoidable. So anyway, you can take a look at that in the show notes. And finally, I want to talk about Martha Stewart, because I guess everyone else is. I have Google alerts, I think I've told you this before, that have just all sorts of different, ticklers for funeral related stories. And that's, how I find some of the stories that I report here. And when Martha Stewart said that she wanted to be buried in her own property, my, human composting and natural organic reduction bells all went off, and I just got story after story after story about Martha Stewart wants to be human composted. I don't know that she does, but I don't think that it matters. So if you're not familiar with the story at all, Martha Stewart was on a podcast, and she said that she doesn't want to be buried in a cemetery, and she doesn't want to go into a casket. She wants to be buried in the ground on her farm, just the way they do with, the horses. And of course, there were a bunch of people saying, she's got a lot of nerve saying that she has horses while people are starving in places all around the world. I don't. It's the internet. You shouldn't look at the internet if you can help it. But the other thing that was interesting is I don't think she was referring to human composting. I think that she was just referring to, natural burial, what we've come to call green burial. But that's not what's important, because what's important is that this conversation gets elevated. And I think that it's awesome that it was elevated by a celebrity who has some cultural cachet and is open to these alternative methods of disposition. And the number of stories that have been written about human composting just based on, Martha Stewart saying that she was considering being just buried in the ground, I think is telling that it's something that has interest. One of the things that I saw was Katrina Spade from Recompose, took the opportunity to say, that's not how it works. we don't come to your farm and human compost you. I mean, she said it more elegantly than that. But Micah Truman of Return Home also kind of called out that the idea behind Martha Stewart's publicly talking about having, and that's the thing, publicly talking about what kind of funeral you want to have is something that we'd all do well to help normalize, to help make people start to think about what they want in a non-funeral way, just in a cultural way. If we can change the cultural conversation about death care, that is, I guess, the end game. But anyway, link to the Martha Stewart story if you haven't seen it, in case you missed it, I guess, in the show notes. And that will do me for this time. In Case You Missed It by Kates-Boylston is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Oh, and videoed by me, Tony Russo. If you're a video person, you can catch this show on YouTube. And of course, while you're over on our YouTube channel, make sure to check out American Cemetery Live. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us by clicking on the show notes, and my email address is right there. And I'll check in with you next time.